Chapter 1. The Boy from Atlanta. Martin Luther King, Jr. was born on January 15, 1929, in Atlanta, Georgia. He came into the world during a difficult time. America was divided. Black and white people were not treated equally. They could not sit together in restaurants. They could not drink from the same water fountains. Even schools were separate. Martin lived in a loving home. His father, Martin Luther King Sr., was a pastor. His mother, Alberta, was a kind and wise woman. She taught Martin to love others, no matter what. Martin had an older sister, Christine, and a younger brother, Alfred. They were a happy family, full of laughter and hope. But outside their home, life was very different. Atlanta, like much of the South, was a segregated city. Segregation meant that black people were kept apart from white people. They could not use the same parks or go to the same hospitals. Signs everywhere reminded Martin of this unfairness. When Martin was 6 years old, he had a white friend. They played together often. One day, his friend's mother told Martin he could not visit anymore. "Why?" Martin asked, his heart sinking. The woman said, "Because you are black." Martin didn't understand. He felt confused and hurt. Why should skin color matter? Martin ran home to his parents, tears streaming down his face. His father held him close. "Son," he said, "you are just as good as anyone else. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." His mother added, "Remember, God made us all. We are all His children." That moment stayed with Martin forever. He saw the world in a new way. He began to notice other injustices. Why could white children go to nice schools while black children could not? Why did black people have to sit in the back of the bus? It made him angry, but his parents taught him to stay calm. "You must fight hate with love," his mother often said. Martin's neighborhood was full of life. He and his friends played in the streets, laughing and running until sunset. But even in these happy times, the shadows of racism were never far away. Once, Martin saw a group of white boys shout cruel names at a black man walking down the street. The man didn't fight back. He just kept walking, his head held high. Martin wondered, how does he stay so strong? At church on Sundays, Martin listened to his father's sermons. His father spoke about fairness and love. He told the congregation that God wanted justice for everyone. Martin loved the way his father's voice filled the room. It was powerful and full of hope. Martin decided he wanted to be like his father one day. Books became another way for Martin to learn about the world. He loved to read stories about great leaders. He admired people like Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. These men had stood up for what was right, even when it was hard. Martin thought, maybe I can do something important too. But life wasn't always easy for young Martin. One day, he and his father went to buy shoes. They walked into a shoe store downtown. The clerk, a white man, looked at them and frowned. "You can't sit here," the man said, pointing to a row of seats at the front. You have to sit in the back." Martin's father stood tall. "We will not buy shoes here," he said firmly, and they walked out. Martin felt proud of his father, but also sad. Why did the world have to be this way? Despite these challenges, Martin's parents made sure he felt loved and confident. They told him he could achieve anything. "You have a voice," his father said. "One day you will use it to make a difference." Martin didn't know it yet, but he was growing into someone special. The world around him was full of unfairness and pain, but it was also full of people who cared. His family, his church, and his community gave him strength. These early lessons shaped the boy who would one day stand before thousands and share his dream for a better world. As Martin fell asleep each night, he thought about the stories he had heard, the books he had read, and the words of his parents. Deep in his heart, a small spark was beginning to grow. It was the spark of a dream for equality. Chapter 2. The Power of Words. Martin Luther King Jr. loved words. He loved the way they could make people think, feel, and act. As a young boy, he listened carefully whenever his father preached at church. His father's voice was deep and strong. It filled the room and touched the hearts of everyone who listened. Martin sat in the front row, watching, learning. Martin's father was more than a preacher. He was a leader. He spoke about justice and hope. He told people that God made everyone equal. "No man is better than another," he would say. The church was filled with amens and nodding heads. Martin saw how his father's words gave people courage. At home, Martin asked questions. "Papa, why do people listen to you?" His father smiled. "Because words have power, son," he said. "Words can build up or tear down. They can heal or hurt." Martin thought about this. He wanted to learn how to use words, too. Books became his best friends. Martin read everything he could find. His mother often found him lost in a book, turning pages slowly, his eyes full of wonder. He read about great leaders, people who used words to change the world. Abraham Lincoln, Frederick Douglass, and Mahatma Gandhi. Their speeches inspired him. One day, Martin found a book of speeches by famous men. He read their words out loud in his room, practicing their rhythm and tone. He stood in front of the mirror, trying to speak like his father. He imagined talking to a crowd, sharing ideas, making a difference. At school, Martin was a bright student. He loved writing essays and giving speeches. His teachers noticed his talent. They encouraged him to speak in front of the class. But sometimes, Martin felt nervous. He worried that people wouldn't listen. Then he remembered his father's advice. Speak from the heart. One afternoon, there was a speech contest at his school. The room was full. Martin stood at the front, his heart pounding. He took a deep breath and began. His voice was clear and steady. He spoke about fairness and kindness. The audience sat quietly, listening to every word. When he finished, the room filled with applause. Martin smiled. He had found his voice. But words were not always enough. One day, Martin saw something that made him angry. a group of white boys were laughing at an old black man on the street. The man kept walking, his head down. Martin clenched his fists. He wanted to shout at them, to tell them to stop. But he remembered what his mother always said: words can change hearts, not fists. Martin ran home and told his parents what had happened. His father listened carefully. "Son," he said, "sometimes it's hard to stay calm, but if you use your words wisely, they can be stronger than anger." Martin nodded. He wanted to be strong with his words, just like his father. Church was where Martin felt the power of words the most. Every Sunday, he watched people's faces light up when his father spoke. They listened with hope, with faith. Martin began to understand that words could bring people together. They could give them strength in difficult times. One evening, Martin's father asked him to say a prayer at church. Martin was nervous, but he stood up and spoke softly. As he finished, the church was silent for a moment. Then a warm "Amen" filled the air. Martin felt proud. He knew words had touched their hearts. As he grew older, Martin's love for words grew too. He wrote speeches and poems. He practiced speaking in front of his mirror, in front of his family, and in front of his friends. He knew that words were not just sounds. They were a force that could bring change. But Martin also saw that words could be used in the wrong way. He heard people say hurtful things about black people. He saw signs that told black people where they could and could not go. These words were used to keep people down, to make them feel small. Martin wanted to change that. He wanted to use words to lift people up, to make them believe in a better future. One day, Martin's mother gave him a new book. It was about Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi believed in peace and nonviolence. He used words and peaceful actions to fight injustice. Martin was amazed. He thought, maybe I can do the same. As Martin lay in bed at night, he thought about the words he had read and the speeches he had heard. He dreamed of standing in front of thousands of people, just like his father, just like Gandhi. He dreamed of using his voice to bring hope, to fight injustice, to change the world. Martin knew he was still young, but deep inside, he felt something growing, a dream, a purpose, a calling, and it all started with words. Chapter 3: A Letter That Broke His Heart. Martin Luther King Jr. grew up in a warm and loving home. His parents taught him that he was special, that he was just as important as anyone else. But outside their home, the world was not so kind. Martin had a white friend who lived nearby. They had played together since they were little. They ran through the streets, played games, and laughed until the sun went down. They were best friends. Or so Martin thought. One day, Martin ran to his friend's house, excited to play. But something felt different. His friend's mother stood at the door. She did not smile. Martin's heart pounded. "Is he home?" Martin asked. The woman looked away. "I'm sorry, Martin," she said. "He can't play with you anymore." Martin frowned. "Why not?" The woman's voice was soft but firm. Because you're colored. Martin stood still. His chest felt tight. But we're friends, he whispered. The door closed slowly. Martin stood outside, confused and hurt, his hands clenched into fists. He did not understand. Why did color matter? They were the same, weren't they? Later that day, Martin found a letter in his mailbox. It was from his friend. His hands trembled as he opened it. The words were neat, but they cut deep. I can't play with you anymore. My father says we have to be separate now. Tears filled Martin's eyes. He read the letter again and again, hoping the words would change. But they didn't. His best friend was gone. Martin ran to his mother, holding the letter tightly. "Mama, why?" he asked. His voice cracked. "Why can't we be friends?" His mother took the letter and sighed. She hugged Martin close. "Oh, my sweet boy," she said. "Some people don't see the world the way we do. They think black and white people can't be friends." Martin's eyes burned with tears. "But that's not fair," he shouted. His mother stroked his hair gently. "No, it's not," she said softly. "But we must keep loving people, even when they don't understand us." That night, Martin lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. His heart ached. He thought about all the fun times he had with his friend, the games, the laughter, the secrets they shared. Now it was all gone, because of something he could not change. Martin's father sat beside him. "I know this hurts, son," he said, "but remember, you are just as good as anyone. Never forget that." Martin nodded slowly, but the pain did not go away. It stayed with him. It made him think. He saw things more clearly now. The world was not fair, but could it change? The next day at school, Martin looked around the classroom. All the students were black. The teachers were black. He remembered passing by another school, one with white children. Their books looked new. Their playground was bigger. Martin wondered, why do they have more? Why is it different? He felt angry, but he also felt something else. Determination. He wanted to do something. He didn't know how. Not yet. But he knew words were powerful. Maybe words could change things. Martin began asking more questions. He listened closely to his father's sermons. He read books about justice and equality. He wanted to understand why the world was this way and how he could make it better. As time passed, the pain of losing his friend became a lesson. It showed him that injustice was real. It hurt people. It separated families. It took away friendships. And it wasn't right. One Sunday, Martin stood in church and listened as his father spoke. "One day, the walls of hate will fall," his father said. "But it takes courage. It takes love." Martin sat up straighter. He believed those words. He wanted to be part of that change. The letter that broke his heart did more than make him sad. It made him think. It made him dream. And it made him stronger. Chapter 4. Finding His Voice. Martin Luther King Jr. grew older, and his dreams grew with him. He wanted to make a difference in the world. He wanted to help people and bring change. But first, he needed to learn more. He needed to prepare. When Martin finished high school, he went to Morehouse College in Atlanta. It was a school for black students, a place where young men could learn and grow. Martin was excited, but also a little nervous. College was a big step. At Morehouse, Martin met new friends. They talked about books, history, and justice. They shared ideas about how to make the world a better place. Martin listened carefully. He wanted to understand people and their struggles. But college was not just about studying. Martin loved to speak. He gave speeches in class and at church. His voice was strong, but it was not just the sound. It was his words, his message. He spoke about fairness, kindness, and hope. People listened. One day, a professor told Martin, "You have a gift. Your words can inspire people." Martin felt proud, but also humble. He knew words were powerful, but he needed to use them wisely. At home, Martin's father was proud of him. "One day, you will stand in my place," he said, smiling. Martin admired his father. He was a preacher, a leader, and a man of faith. His sermons were full of passion. People came to church to hear him speak and to find hope. Martin wanted to be like his father, but in his own way. He wanted to reach more people. He wanted to help those who suffered from racism and injustice. He wanted to teach people to love, even when it was hard. After Morehouse, Martin went to Crozer Theological Seminary in Pennsylvania. It was far from home, and most of the students were white. At first, Martin felt out of place. Some students looked at him differently, but he did not let it stop him. He worked hard, studied late, and kept his head high. One day, he read about Mahatma Gandhi, a leader from India. Gandhi believed in nonviolence. He taught people to fight injustice with peace, not hate. Martin was amazed. He thought, "This is what I believe. This is the way." Martin began to speak more about peace and justice. He told his classmates that love was stronger than hate. Some agreed. Others did not. But Martin did not give up. He believed in his message. While at Crozer, Martin won an award for his speeches. He stood in front of a large crowd and spoke about hope and equality. His voice was calm, but powerful. People clapped and cheered. Martin felt something deep inside, a calling. After graduating, Martin decided to continue his studies. He went to Boston University to become a doctor of theology. Boston was different from the South. There were fewer signs of segregation, but racism was still there, hidden in other ways. In Boston, Martin met a young woman named Coretta Scott. She was beautiful and smart. She loved music and cared about justice, just like him. They talked for hours about their dreams. Soon, they fell in love and got married. Coretta believed in Martin's vision. She stood by his side, ready to support him. After years of study, Martin became Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He was proud, but he knew his journey was just beginning. He returned to the South with Coretta, ready to serve, ready to speak. Martin took a job as a preacher at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. The church was small, but the people were kind. They believed in him. They wanted change. Every Sunday, Martin stood at the pulpit and spoke with passion. He talked about love, faith, and fairness. People listened closely. They felt hope when they heard his words. They believed that change was possible. But outside the church, life was still hard for black people. They could not sit in the same places as white people. They could not vote easily. They were treated unfairly every day. Martin knew that preaching was not enough. He needed to act. He needed to take his message beyond the church walls, into the streets, into homes, into hearts. As he walked through Montgomery, he saw people struggling. He heard their stories, mothers, fathers, children, all waiting for a better future. Martin thought, I must help them. I must use my voice. His journey was only beginning, but Martin was ready. He was finding his voice, and soon the whole world would hear it. Chapter 5. The Montgomery Bus Boycott. It was a cold evening in Montgomery, Alabama. Rosa Parks, a tired seamstress, sat quietly on a city bus. She had finished a long day at work and just wanted to go home. The bus moved slowly through the streets, stopping to pick up more passengers. Suddenly, the driver looked at Rosa. His voice was sharp. "Get up," he said. "Give your seat to a white man." Rosa looked up. She felt her heart beating fast. She knew the rules. Black people had to sit at the back of the bus. If the white section was full, they had to give up their seats. But Rosa was tired of giving in, tired of being treated unfairly. She shook her head. "No," she said, calmly but firmly. The driver's face turned red with anger. "If you don't get up, I'll call the police." Rosa sat still. She was not going to move. Soon, the police arrived. They asked Rosa to stand. Again, she refused. They took her off the bus and arrested her. Rosa's heart ached, but she did not cry. She had done nothing wrong. When the news spread, people were shocked. Some were afraid, but others were inspired. They wanted to do something, to stand up, just like Rosa. In a small church, black leaders met to talk about what to do next. One man stood up. He was young, but his voice was strong. His name was Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. He looked around the room and said, "This is our moment. We must act with courage and with love." Everyone listened. They knew Martin was right. But what could they do? Then someone had an idea. "Let's stop riding the buses," they said. "If we stop using them, the city will have to listen." Martin agreed. "Yes," he said. "We will walk. We will carpool. We will find other ways. But we will not ride the buses." The next day, the boycott began. The buses were nearly empty. Black men and women walked to work, to school, and to church. Some walked miles, their feet sore and tired. Others shared cars and rode together. Drivers honked their horns in support. Children watched their parents walk with pride. The streets were filled with hope and determination. But not everyone was happy. The bus company was losing money. White city leaders were angry. They tried to scare the people. Some threatened to take away jobs. Others sent hateful messages. Martin became the face of the movement. He spoke to crowds, reminding them to stay peaceful. "We must not hate," he said. "We must love, even when it's hard." One night Martin was at home with his wife, Coretta, and their little girl. The phone rang. Martin picked it up. A voice on the other end whispered, "If you don't stop, we'll hurt you." Martin sat down. His hands shook. He was afraid, but he could not give up. The boycott went on for weeks, then months. People stayed strong. They refused to ride the buses, no matter how hard it got. Rain fell, and people walked with umbrellas. The sun burned, and they kept walking. Reporters came to Montgomery. The whole country started watching. They saw the peaceful protest and began to understand the struggle. Finally, after more than a year, something amazing happened. The Supreme Court made a decision. The buses in Montgomery must be desegregated. Black people could sit anywhere they wanted. Cheers filled the streets. People hugged and cried. They had won. They had changed the law with courage and determination. On the first day back on the bus, Martin sat beside Rosa Parks. They smiled at each other. The journey was long, but they knew it was worth it. The Montgomery bus boycott was just the beginning. It showed the world that change was possible, without violence, without hate. It showed that standing together could make a difference. And Martin, he had found his calling. He knew his voice could lead people to justice. The fight for equality was far from over, but he was ready. Before we begin, Chapter 6, a quick note for our listeners. You're currently listening to this audiobook on Woo English. Remember, this content is specially made for Woo English listeners only. If you're hearing it on any other channel, it may be a violation of Woo English's rights. Please ensure you're tuned into the right source to fully enjoy and respect this audiobook journey. Now, let's continue the story. Chapter 6, Facing the Enemy. Martin Luther King Jr. believed in peace. He believed in love, but not everyone agreed with him. Some people hated his ideas. They did not want change. They wanted things to stay the same, unfair and divided. After the Montgomery bus boycott, Martin became famous. His speeches were on the radio. His picture was in newspapers. Many people looked up to him, but others were angry. They did not want black people to have equal rights. They wanted Martin to stop. One night Martin sat at home with his wife, Coretta, and their baby daughter. The phone rang. Martin answered. A voice whispered, "If you don't stop, you will die." Then the line went silent. Martin put the phone down slowly. His hands were shaking. He looked at Coretta. "It was another threat," he said softly. Coretta took his hand. "Are you afraid?" she asked. Martin sighed. "Yes," he said, "but I can't stop now." Threats came every day. Phone calls, letters, even strangers on the street. Some people threw rocks at his house. Others shouted terrible words when he walked by. Still, Martin did not stop. He stayed strong. One day, during a speech in a crowded church, someone shouted from the back, "Go home, Martin. We don't want you here." Martin paused. He looked out at the crowd. His heart was beating fast, but he stayed calm. "I am home," he said firmly. "This is my home, and I will not leave until there is justice." The people in the church clapped and cheered. They believed in him. But the danger was real. One night, as Martin was speaking at a meeting, someone threw a bomb at his house. The explosion shook the ground. People screamed and ran toward the house. Smoke filled the air. Martin rushed home, his heart racing. He found Coretta holding their baby. They were safe, but the house was damaged. A crowd gathered outside, angry and afraid. "We must fight back," someone shouted. Martin raised his hand. "No," he said. His voice was steady, but strong. "We must not fight with our fists. We must fight with love." The crowd listened. Slowly, they calmed down. They trusted Martin. They knew he was right. Violence would not bring peace. Martin often felt tired. The pressure was heavy. Sometimes, late at night, he sat alone and prayed. He asked God for strength. He wanted to be brave, but fear crept into his heart. Would his family be safe? Would he live to see change? Despite the threats, Martin traveled across the country. He gave speeches in churches, schools, and public squares. People came from everywhere to hear him. "We must walk together," he told them. "We must believe in a better world." But the enemies did not stop. In one city, police officers arrested Martin and his friends. They put them in jail for marching peacefully. The jail cell was small and cold. Martin sat on the hard floor, thinking. He missed his family. He missed freedom. Then he remembered something. Even in jail, he thought, I am free because I believe in justice. He wrote letters from his cell. He told people not to give up. We will win, he wrote, if we stay strong and peaceful. After many days, Martin was released. He walked out of jail with his head high. The crowd outside cheered. They had not lost hope. Martin knew the fight was far from over. The enemies were still out there. They were powerful. They were angry. But Martin had something stronger: love, faith, and the belief that one day all people would be free. His journey was full of danger, but he never gave up. He faced his enemies with courage. He knew the path to freedom was not easy, but it was worth it. Chapter 7. Marching for Freedom. The streets were filled with footsteps. Thousands of people walked together, side by side. They held signs high above their heads. They sang songs of hope and courage. Their voices rose through the air like a mighty wave. They were marching for freedom. Martin Luther King Jr. walked among them. His heart was full of pride. These people, young and old, men and women, believed in change. They were tired of waiting. They wanted justice, and they wanted it now. But the road to freedom was not easy. Many people did not want things to change. They believed black people should stay separate, that things should stay the same. Martin knew this fight would be long, but he also knew they could not stop. One of the first big marches took place in Birmingham, Alabama. The city was full of unfair laws. Black people could not eat in the same restaurants as white people. They could not use the same restrooms or drink from the same fountains. It was time to take a stand. Martin and his friends planned a peaceful march. They told people, "We will walk together. We will not fight. We will show the world our strength." And so they marched. The streets were lined with police officers. Some held batons. Others had dogs. The marchers kept walking. They held hands and sang, "We shall overcome." Suddenly, the police gave an order. "Stop this march now!" But the marchers did not stop. They walked with their heads high. Then, the police attacked. Water hoses sprayed powerful jets of water, knocking people down. Dogs barked and lunged. People screamed. But even in the chaos, the marchers did not fight back. They got up and kept walking. Martin was arrested. He was thrown into a cold, dark jail cell. He sat on the hard floor, but his spirit was not broken. He took out a pen and paper and began to write. In his letter, he said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." His words inspired people across the country. After days in jail, Martin was released. He stepped outside to find even more people waiting to march. He smiled. The movement was growing. More marches followed. In Washington, D.C., thousands gathered at the Lincoln Memorial. People came from all over the country. They carried signs that said, "We want justice now." They sang, they prayed, they hoped. Then Martin stepped onto the stage. He looked out at the sea of faces, black and white, young and old. He took a deep breath and began to speak. "I have a dream." His voice echoed through the air. He spoke of a future where black and white children could play together, where people would be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. People wept. They cheered. They believed in his dream. But the fight was not over. More marches took place in cities like Selma, Alabama. This time, they were marching for the right to vote. Black people were not allowed to vote freely. They had to take unfair tests. Some were even threatened when they tried to register. Martin led the march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. The sun was hot, and the crowd was silent. Suddenly, police blocked their way. "Turn around!" they shouted. Martin did not turn back. He stood firm. Then, the police charged. They hit the marchers with clubs. Tear gas filled the air. People ran, coughing and crying. Martin fell to his knees, but he did not give up. The next day, they marched again. And again. More people joined them. Black, white, young, and old. Finally, the government listened. The Voting Rights Act was passed. Black people could now vote freely. It was a victory, but Martin knew the journey was not over. March after march, step after step, the fight for freedom continued. Martin told the people, "We must keep going. We must never stop until justice is real for everyone." With each march, they changed hearts. With each step, they changed laws. The marches for freedom were not just about walking. They were about hope, courage, and the dream of a better tomorrow. Chapter 8. The Dream That Changed the World. It was a hot summer day in Washington, D.C. The sun shone brightly, and the air was thick with excitement. Thousands of people gathered in front of the Lincoln Memorial. Some had traveled for days to be there. They stood shoulder to shoulder, waiting to hear the man who had given them hope. Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. The crowd stretched as far as the eye could see. People held signs that read, "Freedom now, and we shall overcome." They sang songs and prayed for justice. Some were nervous. Others were filled with hope. They had come to fight for their rights. Peacefully. Martin stood at the top of the steps. He looked out at the faces below, black and white, young and old, rich and poor. They were all there for the same reason. They believed in change. They believed in his dream. He took a deep breath. The crowd grew silent. Then, in a calm, steady voice, he began to speak. "I have a dream." His words echoed through the air. They were strong. They were full of hope. Martin spoke of a future where children of all races could play together without fear. He dreamed of a world where people would be judged by their character, not by the color of their skin. He spoke of freedom, justice, and unity. The crowd listened closely. Some nodded. Others wiped tears from their eyes. His words touched their hearts. "I have a dream that one day all men will be treated equally." People cheered. The sound filled the air like music. Martin's voice grew louder, filled with passion. He spoke about the mountains of injustice that needed to be moved. He talked about the chains of segregation that had to be broken. His dream was not just for black people. It was for everyone. It was a dream of peace, of fairness, of love. Martin's words painted a picture of a better tomorrow. A tomorrow where black and white children could sit in the same schools. A tomorrow where families could eat in the same restaurants. A tomorrow where all people could live without fear. But Martin also spoke of the struggle. He reminded the people that the road to freedom was long. There would be challenges. There would be pain. But he told them to keep moving forward. "We cannot walk alone," he said. The crowd clapped and cheered again. They believed in his words. They believed in his dream. People watching from home sat glued to their televisions. Across America, millions heard Martin's speech. Some were inspired. Others were afraid. They knew that change was coming. Martin ended his speech with powerful words. "Let freedom ring," he said. His voice soared, filling every corner of the crowd. Let freedom ring from every mountaintop, every hill, every valley. The crowd erupted in applause. People hugged each other. They held their signs high. They sang and prayed. It was a moment of hope, a moment that would never be forgotten. But Martin knew the dream was not yet reality. The struggle was not over. The fight for justice would continue. Some people still did not want change. There would be challenges ahead. As Martin stepped down from the podium, reporters rushed to him. "Dr. King, what now?" they asked. Martin smiled. "We keep going," he said. "We keep marching. We keep fighting until the dream is real." The "I Have a Dream" speech became one of the most famous speeches in history. Schools taught it. Newspapers printed it. People remembered it. Martin's words had lit a fire in the hearts of millions. Even today, his dream lives on. People still listen to his speech. They still believe in his message of love, unity, and justice. Martin Luther King Jr. had a dream, and it changed the world. Chapter 9. A Movement of Love. Martin Luther King Jr. believed that love was stronger than hate. He knew that violence could not bring peace. Instead, he chose a different way, the way of nonviolence. Martin learned about nonviolence from a man named Mahatma Gandhi, who had led a peaceful fight for freedom in India. Gandhi believed that people could change the world without using weapons or anger. His ideas inspired Martin. He believed that love, patience, and courage could win against injustice. Martin taught others about nonviolence. He told them, "We will not fight with our fists. We will fight with our hearts." He believed that hate could only be defeated by love. His words touched many people. They were ready to follow his path. But not everyone believed in peace. Some people wanted to fight back. They were tired of being treated unfairly. They wanted quick action, not patience. Martin understood their pain. He told them, "Violence only brings more violence. Love is the only way to win." The civil rights movement grew stronger with Martin's message of love. Peaceful protests took place all over the South. People marched through the streets holding signs that said freedom and equality for all. They sat quietly in restaurants where they were not welcome. They refused to leave until they were treated fairly. These protests were called sit-ins. Young men and women would sit at lunch counters knowing they could be arrested or attacked. They did not fight back. They sat in silence, their hearts filled with hope. They believed in Martin's dream. One day, in the city of Birmingham, Alabama, protesters walked peacefully through the streets. They carried signs and sang songs. But soon, police officers arrived. They had dogs. They held water hoses. The police ordered the marchers to stop. The people stood still. Then, the hoses sprayed powerful water, knocking people down. Dogs barked and lunged. Some marchers cried out, but they did not run. They got up and stood again. Martin watched the scene with tears in his eyes. He felt their pain, but he also felt their strength. He told the marchers, "Stay strong. Do not hate. Keep walking with love in your hearts." Even in jail, Martin never gave up his message of peace. When he was arrested in Birmingham, he wrote a letter from his cell. In the letter, he said, "Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." His words spread across the country. More and more people began to believe in his way. Not everyone agreed. Some people, even friends, told Martin that non-violence was too slow. They wanted to fight back. Martin shook his head. "We must be patient," he said. "Change is coming." His patience was tested many times. Angry mobs yelled at him during speeches. People threw things at marchers. But Martin never let fear stop him. He believed in love. He believed in peace. Soon, more people of all races joined the movement. White men and women marched alongside black protesters. They sat together at protests. They held hands and sang together. Martin's message of love was bringing people together. One of the greatest victories came in 1964. The U.S. government passed the Civil Rights Act. This law made segregation illegal. It was a huge step forward. People cheered and hugged each other. Martin smiled, but he knew there was still more work to do. Martin continued his journey, speaking across the country. He told people, "We must walk forward with love, not fear." He knew the fight for justice would take time, but he also knew that love was the greatest force of all. Through marches, speeches, and peaceful protests, Martin showed the world the power of non-violence. His movement of love inspired millions, and it still inspires people today. Chapter 10. The Cost of Courage. Martin Luther King Jr. knew that fighting for justice was dangerous. Every day he faced threats. Every step he took brought risk. But he did not stop. He could not stop. He believed in freedom for all people, and he was willing to pay the price. Martin's phone rang often. On the other end, there were angry voices. "Stop now, or you will regret it," they warned. Some letters arrived at his house, filled with hateful words. But Martin kept going. He refused to let fear win. One night, Martin sat in his living room with his wife, Coretta. Their children were asleep. The house was quiet until the phone rang again. Martin picked it up and listened. His face grew serious. He hung up slowly. Coretta looked at him. "Another threat?" she asked softly. Martin nodded. "They say they will bomb the house." Coretta took his hand. "We will not be afraid," she said. But fear was hard to ignore. One night, a bomb exploded outside their home. The blast shook the house. Windows shattered. The children cried. Martin ran outside. A crowd had gathered, angry and ready to fight back. Martin raised his hand and spoke calmly. "No violence," he said. "We must meet hate with love." Slowly, the crowd listened. They put down their sticks and stones. Martin's courage gave them strength. But the threats did not stop. The police arrested Martin many times. They said he was disturbing the peace. They wanted to silence him. But Martin knew the real reason. They were afraid of his voice. One of the hardest moments came in Birmingham, Alabama. Martin led a peaceful march, but the police were waiting. They blocked the streets. "Go home," they shouted. But Martin and the marchers did not turn back. The police arrested him and threw him into jail. The cell was dark and cold. Martin sat on the hard floor. He was tired. He missed his family. He closed his eyes and prayed. In the silence, doubts crept into his mind. Am I doing the right thing? Is it worth it? But deep inside, he knew the answer. Yes, it was worth it. While in jail, Martin wrote a letter. He had no paper at first, so he wrote in the margins of an old newspaper. In his letter, he spoke about justice. He wrote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." His words were powerful. They reached people across the country. They gave hope. After days in jail, Martin was finally released. He stepped outside and the crowd cheered. But the fight was not over. Sometimes the weight of leadership felt heavy. The long marches, the arrests, the threats, it all took a toll. Martin felt tired, but he kept moving forward. He often reminded himself, the road to freedom is not easy, but we must walk it together. Even when he was not in jail, Martin was followed. People watched him closely, looking for mistakes. They wanted to stop him. But Martin stayed focused. He spoke with wisdom. He acted with love. He believed that standing up for what was right meant staying strong, even in the face of danger. Despite the struggles, Martin found strength in his faith. He prayed often. He read the Bible and found comfort in its words. He believed that God was with him. "Do not be afraid," he whispered to himself. "Keep going." The cost of courage was high, but Martin did not carry it alone. Coretta stood by his side. His friends and supporters marched with him. People around the world watched and cheered him on, and with every step, Martin's spirit grew stronger. He knew that change was coming. He could see it in the eyes of the people. He could feel it in their voices, and that gave him hope. Hope that one day justice and peace would fill the streets of America. Martin never gave up. He taught the world that courage is not the absence of fear, but the strength to keep going, even when fear is all around.